Okay, so these guys are all from churches around this area and have been in this area for a long time. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Taylor is a part of
The Bridge.
The Bridge. Redemption City was coming to mind. But you've been on staff as a songwriter as well.
Yeah, so I'm a writer at Curb Word and have been worship director of the Bridge Church for the last 3 years. And it's been great. Yeah.
Yes, and they've been working on their songwriting stuff. I know a lot too. Mike, Grayson,
Yes.
he was at Crosspoint for several years.
Yeah.
And Mike and I met, we had the most interesting meeting, I think. We were at a centricity retreat, and they had a pick your own co-writer moment. And we were not picked.
We were just sitting there saying, well, do you want to write? We didn't know each other, and it was a God thing.
We
wasn't
laughed so hard. We
Yeah.
laughed so hard, and we've been writing ever since. And that was how many years ago? 5 at least?
it? At least, yeah.
Yeah. And then y'all know Dwan from this morning? Yes. But I wanted to start out today really just addressing this kind of new thing that's come up in this culture, which is, you know, the industry is no longer the gatekeepers of the music in our industry anymore. It's turning into the hands of the churches. And we've all seen that shift, and it's been interesting to watch happen. But what I also see happening is people realizing, well, if other churches are singing their own songs, what if we try that? And I think it's beautiful in a lot of ways because, I mean, that is how things started out. I mean, in tribes and nations across the world, people had their own songs for years. And it's only been really since the 70s that got kind of shut down and it all started going through distribution and everything sort of changed. So while it feels like a new thing, it's actually a very ancient thing. But all of you have walked through that process of helping to establish songwriting cultures. And I've walked with Mike through that process pretty closely. Right, Mike? And so I wanted to ask you first, Mike, if you would share just a little bit about your experience and what that's been like, because I know a lot of these people here have questions about how to get started and what that looks like.
So how many of you are actually like part of a church as far as like worship team or worship leaders or, okay, that's helpful, awesome. So I started at our church here in town called Crosspoint. It was about 5 years ago, and one of the things when I got hired was to establish original music in the church. I had come from a touring background. I was a CCM artist for a lot of years and traveled a lot. A band called Mike's Chair, and yes, 2 people. Hence why I'm not doing it anymore. No, that was a great season, but I just knew it was time to get off the road, and so I was already a part of my church for many years, and it was a very natural progression. But it was, how do you take a church that's in Music City that has a ton of writers and artists and musicians as part of the community, and yet for 10 years of that time, there wasn't a culture where the community came together and actually wrote songs for the church. And so we kind of, when I got there, we kind of started from the ground up, which there was a huge shift just naturally in our church at the time. Our founding pastor had left, and we were kind of in transition anyways. So that was kind of a gift, if I'm honest, just because when everything is shaken up already, it creates a path for change and for desperation, like for the Lord to come in and fill those cracks. And so we just kind of started not writing songs. We started just worshiping. If there's anything I can say, the goal should never be to write songs, right? The goal should be to worship and let songs pour out of that place. And so I remember I was almost a year and a half into it, And one guy on the staff was like, Mike, your job is to write, like, help us write songs. Why aren't we writing songs? And it was because it just wasn't time yet. Like, we needed the heart of worship before we just started writing songs. And so that takes time sometimes, you know, and it is cool now 5 years later to kind of be able to look back and say, man, even though parts of that was really frustrating and you want to just jump to songs and releases and all the things, if you skip the first step, the rest isn't going to happen. So I don't know, I'll pass it on from there.
Yeah, so good. So you started from nothing, and what is happening now? Like, where have you
Yeah,
gone
so
in
now the church is thriving. It's the worship culture is definitely, there's been a big shift over the last couple of years, and we are writing and releasing songs, and the church has since partnered with a label here in town and releasing music, and you know, some of that, it sounds awesome. We can get into the things that aren't awesome about that, you know, like that again, I'll be honest and say I kind of fought at the beginning, because what is genuine and authentic can quickly turn when you start making it about releases, right? So I do think knowing where your church is and where the health of your team is really important before you really start going beyond writing songs for your church. Because again, that's when you see kind of craziness happen. So I mean, the church is doing some really cool things, and I'm no longer there, but I don't know if we talk about that, but was just feel incredibly blessed to be a part of, kind of being a part of bringing it to where it is now. So,
Bro, and that's the leaving the path behind you wider. You're no longer there, but the culture that is in place is testament to your leadership and also what the Lord did. It's been great to see Mike lead the way he has for the last several years. And we've copied and pasted a lot from Crosspoint in our church, so.
Hopefully deleted some as well.
A lot of deletes, yeah.
Tell us about you guys, Taylor. Tell us what you
Yeah,
do.
so when I came to the Bridge, our executive pastor, Stone Meyer, was actually A&R at Capitol for a long time. So, like you said, we can get into the good, the bad, the ugly, but every church, let me just speak this into existence, is going to deal with blurring the lines between record label and ministry. Okay, when you start making records, right, you're going to have a lot of the baggage that comes along with that. So Stone, being A&R at Capitol, realized one day that he wanted to stop making records and start making disciples. And so he came to the Bridge, and the question he got all the time is like, hey, when are we going to start releasing music? And to just honor Stone, he's not in the room, but he waited on the Lord. And so he did not rush into it. He didn't want to put the cart before the horse, right? And I think what was so cool about when I came on staff is being a assigned writer in the industry, we were able to kind of join forces and identify those that had an anointing on their lives to like be our people, right? And so we started doing writing days. Guys, we had no idea what the crap we were doing. We're like, yeah, let's get together and bring our brokenness and just start writing. And it was messy. But one of the things we laid a foundation for was even if the song went nowhere beyond the walls of that room that you wrote it in, hopefully you leave with a stronger relationship, right? And the song already served an eternal purpose, even if no one else heard the song, right? It has ripple effects into eternity. And so hopefully you leave the room with a song and with a great relationship. But yeah, we learned by trial and error. But we started doing once a quarter writing days, and I'm just jumping all the way ahead. We just had our last one last week. We had over 50 writers come. We had over 14 writers' rooms, over 20 songs were written. And there was just a sound of worship that was down our halls, all day, and it was beautiful. But yeah, anyway, that's where we're at currently.
Awesome. Dwan, we want to hear from you. What's
Yes.
your experience?
Well, I moved to Nashville as a piano player and had never led worship before. And I went to a prayer meeting at Cece Winans and her husband started this church, Nashville Life, there in Nashville. And I showed up in their living room only a piano player. And I remember the first night that they needed music, she looked at me and said, "Can you lead us in a song?" No. Imagine a worship night at CeCe Winans' house. There was CeCe Winans and famous person, famous person, famous person, famous worship leader, famous worship leader. And she looked at me and said, "I want you to lead us in a song." And I will always honor her as a disciple maker for that reason, because she saw something in me. I could cry thinking about it. But she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And she pushed me into a calling that I didn't even know existed. And she called out an identity in me that, we sung this morning. This would not have happened this morning if someone didn't see that in me. So to your same point about making disciples versus records, we as a church, we did that for about 8 years before we recorded any music. I since became the worship pastor at that church, and we raised up worship leaders, and I knew what it felt like to not be a worship leader, so I felt like I had a heart for people who were kind of shaking in their boots and didn't know how to do it, and I kind of started reaching out to friends and people who went to school with Mike, worship leaders at Crosspoint, worship leaders at Belonging. We all just connected and knew that God was doing something special in our town. And same thing as they're saying, from that experience, songs started to come out of our church. And what I love about local church songs is that they have the opportunity to represent what is going on in that church. And in our church, our testimony, we are fun-loving people. I mean, you come to any of our services and we're having fun. And it was hard for us to find fun songs. We started writing songs out of necessity. It wasn't to make a record. It was, we want to jump around. We want to wave our hands. And I love all the, meditative soaking songs. I use those all the time, but I needed one song that was faster than something. And so it came out of necessity. It was not a creative decision. We need fast songs. And so if you listen to our record right now, you would hear mostly fast songs, not because we were trying to make a trendy decision. That's what we needed for our church. And so that would be my encouragement to everybody is write for your church. Write for your church. You may need slow songs. You may need songs of lament. I know a church in town who just lost their pastor tragically in an accident, and all they're singing right now is how the Lord takes you through grief and mourning. And that's 100% appropriate. It would be inappropriate for me to come in there and force them to do something else. And so I have a feeling that there's a song of the Lord for your church and for your house, and sing that, because that's going to bounce off not record label walls but hearts of people, and it'll resonate with them in a way that Bethel can't resonate with them, Elevation can't resonate with them, and they shouldn't. Those songs work for them. You should sing their songs. They're amazing. But I bet if you started to insert at least 1 or 2 songs a month, dare I say 1 song a Sunday, that's going along with a sermon series or a recent event that happened in your church or a theological point that you want to drive home, man, I think you should write out of necessity first, because you need it. And then if other churches need it, big if, that's a blessing and that's an added bonus. And that's when you start talking about recording. Because other than that, it's for your people, it's for your house.
And can I add to that real quick? I think one of the greatest detriments to the creative church today is wanting to write for the church but not from it. And so David Leonard has said that when people come to him and say, hey, I want to write for the church, he asks them, are you in a small group, right? Because a shepherd smells like sheep. And if you're not walking with people, you don't know the stories of the people you're writing for, then you really don't have a place, and maybe you're pushing a prideful agenda. And so writing out of necessity and from a place of testimony is absolutely key, or the foundation you're building on will crumble. Yeah.
Yes, amen.
Sorry, that was really harsh.
It's needed. Okay, so we have a few questions that I took ahead of time, and I'm going to ask you these sort of one at a time, and then we'll open up for more questions. And feel free to just interject what you guys feel as it comes to mind. But, okay, first one. I would love to hear about how you communicate to and receive support from top church leadership, because I've observed and also personally experienced how a first or second attempt releasing music didn't lead to any real success and was viewed as a failure.
Wow. Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say 1,000% was not a failure. I think just stepping out is obedience, and that's success. When things get sticky, is the song popular, right? And not every song that a church is going to sing is going to be popular to the world. Like, what we're saying is, you write songs for your church, not the world, right? And so when you write songs for your church, like he was saying, if your church needs a song that just they can sob at the feet of Jesus, not everybody is in that season. That's not necessarily going to be the most popular song in the world, but it's going to be the song that your church needs, right? And so I will say this, when it comes to, if you feel this burden that we are supposed to write and release music on a very practical level, if you don't have support from your top leadership, it will be very hard. I've experienced that at our church where the reason why it took 10 years was because the first leader did not see the value in that. Whereas current leadership really feels that there's a correlation between songs and revival. And so there is almost a necessity and urgency for songs. And so because of that, I mean, the Lord has microwaved a lot at Crosspoint because of the fact that from the top down, there is support, right? I will say there was a moment, and this is maybe just speaking to potential insecurity in the room. Granted, you have to have a lot of trust with leadership. There was a moment early on where I was like, oh, we're writing these songs. I was nervous to put them in a set on Sunday because there is this pressure to play the hits sometimes on Sunday mornings, And I was like, this is not going to be a hit. Nobody knows it. Like, how are we going to do this? And I remember just having that moment where it was very clear, like the Lord put me in that spot for a reason, and somebody has to champion the songs of your church. And so it wasn't a prideful place. It wasn't a place of like pushing my own songs. It was a place of, Lord, if you are calling us to this, and we believe that these songs are better than XYZ hit song, then we're in disobedience not playing these songs on a Sunday, right? And the only reason that worked was because I had the support of leadership, right? So there was a trust there where I could start saying, you know what? We're gonna just start adding them in every week. And it got to the point where, the last Sunday that I led at Crosspoint was all original music. And the church, and that's thank you, but that's not like pat on the back. That's just saying your church will sing the songs that you write for them louder than any other song that was written. You know what I mean? So if you steward that and you go slowly and you and leadership walk together in it, and it doesn't feel like I'm just I wrote this song and I think it's good and we should play it, but it's from a place of, man, this song speaks to the pastor's heart for where he's taken the church. The song is singable. We can talk about the practicalities of songs, but it really does come down to, you have to have that trust and support from the top. And if you don't, there is an element of pushing, but then there is also an element of surrendering to maybe this isn't the place for these songs. Maybe there's someplace outside of the church. Christy and I have talked about that a lot. Or maybe it's just not the season, So there is a discernment level there when it comes to how far to push and when to kind of let up.
It's really good. Yeah, a lot of times we don't see past the four walls. We think that's the only spot that we can share songs or have our songs be shared, but that's simply not the truth. The church is gigantic, so I think we do need to think.
Can I just
outside the
add
box.
something to that?
Yeah,
because I've been convicted of this in my family. I have been more excited to write a song for Sunday than I do for bedtime with my kids. And the reason that's convicting for me is I've asked why. Why am I not inspired to write a Bible-based song for my family around dinner time? Why hasn't that crossed my mind? And why am I more motivated to write something for 500 people than the 3 people in my house? And the Holy Spirit said it's because you're prideful. You still crave the affirmation of the group more than the small group of people. And I just want to encourage you guys, there is more writing to be done than Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Way more. Way more. I mean, if you really want to practice songwriting, try and get your 3-year-old to sing something back to you. If they sing that back to you, you're the best songwriter in the world. And he just upgraded the value of my family and why it's important to write songs for my whole Christian life. And then basically the greatest hits started to make it to Sunday. Because at that point, I knew they were pure. They weren't coming from a place of competition or other churches or trying to impress my pastor. It was, this melody came in our prayer time this morning with my wife, and that's about as pure as it gets. And so I just want to encourage you guys that it's okay to not practice on your family, but the Sunday morning experience should be an overflow of what you're doing at home. It should be an overflow of what you're doing at home. And there are like I said, there's so many songs in your catalog right now that could be a blessing to your family.
Yeah, it starts at home, for sure. Okay. I think I got all of that question. Did I? Okay. We got another one. What kind of mentoring in worship do you offer to your musicians, songwriters, as well as your congregation? Did you or do you offer any kind of mentorship?
Yeah, so I assume all of y'all have like a groups network, right, at your church? It's like small groups, or we call them bridge groups. They can be life groups. But we have groups, and then we have classes, right? So classes like Financial Peace University, or like Parenthood, or which I have never been in that class. I would not know what to do. But I decided to start a songwriting class this past semester, and it got a little tricky because let me also just say this, and I'm just pulling back the curtain. We have our worship ministry, right? When we started to write and release songs, we had bridge worship. So we have our bridge worship team, then we have bridge worship. And what I learned is that if you're serving in bridge worship, you are absolutely a part of the worship team at the bridge. But if you're at the worship team at the bridge, if you're actively serving, it does not mean that you necessarily have a seat at the table, the decision-making table, the recording, the releasing table that is bridge worship. And that was so hard to learn, who has a seat at the table. And feelings were hurt, right? Because you have this group of songwriters that would come up to me like, hey, I want to write for the church, I want to write from the church. And it's like, what do we do with these people that like have a genuine God-driven passion and perhaps call on their life? And we identified like the 12 people that we knew were our core bridge worship team. And I'll say this, sometimes when you shut a door, it becomes a room, and you need that. It doesn't mean the door's locked, right? But when you close a door so you can intentionally invest in a certain group of people, it is beneficial to the health of that culture. And we knew the people we wanted to create with. So getting back to all the others that were like, hey, I want to learn how to write songs. I am writing songs. We started a class. It was a songwriting class, right? And I led it very just openly every single week. And we had group assignments. People cried. There was drama. It felt like an episode of like a MTV reality show, right? Like we needed a camera crew. But we learned, because what co-writing is, it's learning how to exist in community, right? And then you're trying to create together. It gets messy. But by the end of this class, it was beautiful to see the relationships that were forged, and then seeing some of the writers that very clearly were like, yes, you have an anointing on your life. Maybe we open up that door for the bridge worship crew, for them to begin writing for the songs we're releasing, right? If you don't have an outlet, everyone needs an outlet for their songs. If you don't have a process, or I hate to say vetting process, you don't have an opportunity for people to be identified who do have a gift of songwriting or a passion that can be molded into a gift, right? Then I think you need to start that immediately. And sometimes it looks like just imperfectly opening the door and be like, hey, bring in your crap, bring in your ideas, let's talk about this. And we got into melody. We got into like rhyme schemes and, iambic pentameter and all the things like, hey, you're already doing this, here's what it's called. And so the knowledge of something does not make it less beautiful. So for us to identify what the different phrases and the different terminologies actually help to them grow as songwriters. And so now the goal is to replicate that. So now one of the people that were in that songwriting class is leading another songwriting class. And we're opening that door even wider. So it's discipleship, right? It's replication. We don't do it perfectly, but that's what we've been doing in order to identify those that have a passion and a call and a gift on their lives to write.
And that is key, having a common language.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about, where everybody knows and everybody has this understanding and a foundation for what you're talking about. That's huge, having a common language with your writers. Okay, I would love, not me, this is somebody else, to pick their brains about partnering with other churches' songwriters. I'm in a small town, so there are a lot of small churches with 1 or 2 songwriters. I would love ideas for developing a community worship writing group. Have any of you done that?
We haven't done an intentional songwriting group. We've done worship nights. I'm sure you guys have done that as well. I think that's a great common table, is to host a worship night in your town. Something that a wide net of churches can come to. So, don't host something that one church would just be turned off to. Curate a set list and a time and a space where a Methodist church and a Baptist church and a non-denominational church, and maybe even the Catholic church would come and be welcomed. Yes. Very good. The reason I say that is because the presence of God does things that meetings can't do. And you start looking across the room at faces and you realize we're not as different as we thought we were across town. And when you lift your hands and worship Jesus, it just changes things. It just does. So that would be my first suggestion. Curate a worship time in your city. We used to call it citywide worship, where we would invite 20 churches to our church or go to someone else's church. We would worship together. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of humility to come up with a set list from 10 different worship leaders. But when it's like herding cats, man. When you get in the room, though, you realize, why unity is such a blessing. And things happen in that room that still affect me today. I still have relationships from those services today. So that would be my suggestion. Then after the worship night, I think that's when you can start having these classes and start making those connections in the room. Because the unity will be a lot easier to curate than not knowing who's in your city.
Yeah. I think, so one practical thing that we have done so far is, Crosspoint is 5 physical locations around Nashville. It's like over 300 worship volunteers. It takes an army basically to pull off weekends, and a lot of people travel. It's Nashville. Same thing. Like, we had a lot of people who were like, hey, I write country music, or I write poetry, or I write pop music. Like, how do I get involved? And so we did start this songwriting community that was open to anyone and everyone. And we started with the basics. We had Chrissy come and she taught a course to everybody and started with the heart and kind of moved from there, which again established the foundation for anyone who is also coming new into the group to say, like, hey, go back and kind of go through this, because this brings you up to speed with everybody. It also made it really clear, like, we're not gathered to write songs for Sunday. We're here to encourage each other, right? Like, it's more about community. Writing songs just naturally builds community, And so from that, do songs or can songs for Sunday for recordings come out of that group? 100%, But we just make it clear that that's not the goal. But when it came to recordings, one of the things that we did, instead of just saying, hey, these are the main worship leaders, they're going to sing on everything, it really came down to, like, who is supposed to carry the song? And we left that to even outside of our church, like, who is supposed to carry the song? And what we found is as we wrote with people from other churches, it was a really cool opportunity to say, you know what, dude, like we've had other people sing this song and you just carry it. Like you carry it in a way that no one in our house does. And so when it came to a recording, we invite them to come, and on each project we've had like outside of our church people come and sing and lead and be a part of it, which is just cool. It's fun. It's fun to collaborate with other people, other churches, other houses, and kind of break down the wall of like, this is our band. And it's like, no, this is like, we're all worshipers here. And some people are meant to carry certain songs. And so just kind of being open to that. So and what an honor, to invite somebody in and say, we want you to carry this for us. So that's just another way to kind of connect with other people.
That's a great idea. I love that. Okay, this is an interesting one. I was wondering if the children's ministries are part of their ongoing songwriting cultures.
The answer is yes.
Yeah?
Y'all, kids' funds are not only fun and family friendly, they're bangers, right? There's so much, they're incredible. And there's no junior Holy Spirit, right? So to be able to take like big truths that kids can grow into instead of small truths they grow out of has been essential to us. So Noelle's sitting in the back. Noelle, you can raise her hand. She's on vocal rest over there for a whole month, right? You can't talk for a month. Yes. Her ENT doctor this morning was Bebo Norman, right? Yeah, was her doctor. Anyway, I don't know why I'm telling all this. I'm sidetracked. Anyway, Noelle is part of our worship culture. We just had our first ever Bridge Kids Writing Day. Yeah. It was so much fun that we're doing it again a month from tomorrow. We're doing another Bridge Kids Writing Day. And I have seen a joy light up in our volunteers and our writers like I have not seen elsewhere. To be able to write for our kids. And I would not be surprised if some of those songs that were written, for children make their way, bubble up to the top for a Sunday service, even though that's not the environment they're written for. And one thing that we did, I would encourage you to do as well, is to invite your kids' ministry leaders to be part of that as well. This also goes to inviting pastors to sit in on co-writing sessions too. Having, not like theology police, but just helping direct what you're writing, right? So yeah, we've had our kids, coordinators, and directors sit in on these writing sessions, and it has been a blast. And they would say, oh, we're not writers, but you know what? They are stewards of hearts and stories and the development of kids that will one day be our future worship leaders and writers and the church of tomorrow, like you said, the 500-year plan, right? So I think that is essential for y'all to write for your kids' ministries. So
Our kids are all coming to that next time you do that, right, guys?
we can totally do that. It's open to everyone.
We're bringing them. I love that. It's so amazing. If you are not the music leader or worship leader, but a member of the team, how do you get their support for trying out some of your songs? That's a good question.
Silence.
I think. So I wish I could ask a little bit. Are you part of the worship team, or are you?
Yes.
You are. Okay.
I think so.
Because that's a big. So I would get sent songs all the time from random people, right? So everything from someone I've never met on a Sunday to people on our team, and I think one of the things that I would always try to filter things through was, is this something that we actually felt like could be sung? Is this something that maybe needs some tweaking? Is this person open to the idea of critique? And then also, what is the motive? Like, what is the heart there? And that's why, like, I do love what you said when you said, like, there's a room without a locked door. There is a certain level of trust that comes with people who have been faithful to the small thing to get to maybe the bigger things. And that's where I think the better approach than saying, hey, worship leader, I want to sing my song, is you come humbly saying, hey, worship leader, what do you think of this song? What could be better about this song? Do you want to contribute to this song? And not to say that they're the gatekeeper, but there is a big difference between saying, I want to be a better songwriter. I would love to one day be a part of writing songs for our church, how do I get in that process, that mentorship, as opposed to just saying, here's my finished song, I think it's awesome, play it, right? So I do think there is an approach, and I've just noticed that there are certain people in my life who just would always send me stuff, and they'd always say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? And then we started kind of a relationship and a dialogue to where I could say, man, those verses are awesome. That chorus is not there yet, and they'd be like, oh, okay. And then there's a back and forth there. Like, there's a relationship. So I think everything needs to start with a relationship,
100%.
not a song. So.
Somebody like that. Okay, so we have a little time left. I want to make sure we have time for live questions because I'm sure some of this conversation has stirred things up in you. So if you have a question, I will come to you. Let's go for it. Anybody? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Daphne. I am a worship leader in my youth group, and our youth group wanted to start writing songs. And I was wondering, how can you have fun with songwriting, but also staying on focus? Because sometimes we'll get started with the songwriting, and then they'll veer off to completely immature conversations. And I know having fun and having that childlike wonder and everything, that's important. But keeping that from becoming childish with others in my age group is kind of difficult.
Do you guys know who Chris McClarney is? Have you written with Chris?
Yes, we rarely get a song.
It is like herding cats. I'm telling you, it's probably worse than anything you've ever experienced. And I love him. He's incredible. There is an element to when you're in a songwriting room to, yes, having somebody who can help steer things back, and yet at the same time, enjoying the moment, yes. Right? There doesn't always have to be a product at the end. Sometimes it's just the journey of getting there. Yes. And I think you know the difference between, hey, we are just genuinely enjoying each other, and we're just we're goofing off. We're getting a little too far. And so, in that specific example with Chris, there are moments where I'm like, all right, guys, let's get back.
Well, hold on.
Let's get to
the
this
reason
chorus.
I started laughing is because we were in Washington, and I walked in on a songwriting session with Chris, and he was laying in a bed holding a guitar, and you threw out a lyric. You said, what about the love that saved our souls? And Chris said, we can't say arseholes. And
meanwhile, the three of us are laying in a bed, just like it had gotten that crazy.
I'm still recovering.
What is happening? We ended up getting a great song that day. That is going to be recorded here soon. But and when you hear the song, you're going to be like, they did not say that word. Yeah. Does that make sense? There's a fine line there, and you usually. That's where I think using Chrissy's personality test is important. Don't put three people in the room with the same thing because nobody's there to bring it back to lyric or bring it back to melody. It's like we just want to sing melodies all day because that's all the three of us do. It's like who's going to bring it back to a lyric?
You're looking for a concept writer is what you're looking for. And your concept, right, Mike? Are you concept? I can't remember. Okay, yeah. But I've written with Mike a lot too, and that's helpful for me because...
Yeah, because who's written with Chrissy?
Oh no, here we go.
No, the thing I love about Chrissy is Chrissy will throw out a million ideas, right? And I'm like, give me all the ideas because I can see the puzzle and I can help put them where they need to go. And Chrissy and I are close enough now that I can be like, whoa, that's left field. Cool thought, but we're not going to throw that weird word into this song, She always wants to throw weird words into songs. But so again, it's relationship, being comfortable enough with people in the room to be like, yo, I love this, but let's get back to the song. And then also sometimes knowing when it is time to just we're not going to get a song today, but we're going to hang out and talk about Jesus, and it's going to be awesome, you know?
So I'm sorry if you've touched on this, but what you were talking about with different churches and what is for one church isn't for another in whatever season they're in. But I'm just wondering, and let's just maybe keep it to the example of Nashville, like are there groups gathering of writers from different churches that would specifically say, what is the Lord saying over Nashville? So that then we can teach the Church of Nashville the song, and within that, that's my question. You hear where I'm going with that? I'm just curious if that is happening right now.
In my experience, no. And it may be different for other people, but no. It's sad to say. I've never been in a songwriting session where someone says, let's write a song for Nashville. I think there are underlying issues there. I don't have time to go into. But I think that's why worship in the presence of God is so important first. Because there's a sense that my church is good, your church is good. Their church is good, their church is good. Hope everybody's good. And I think because of that, there's not a lot of crosstalk happening. And even we've been talking a lot about your church, your church, your church. But I think it would be helpful. I think that's a great idea.
Let's do it.
We got to do it. We got to do it. I haven't seen it happen. I think it'd be a great idea.
I was going to say, too, when you read Scripture, this is just a theory. Please, someone back me up theologically on this later. But when Paul writes to the church in, like, Galatia or Philippi, right, I picture modern-day letters. Would he just write to the church in Nashville? You know? Right, yeah, to the 7 churches, right? Where would he just write to the church in Nashville, not the Bridge Church, not Crosspoint, not... So I just wonder, are we missing something that would point us to unity? That's a great question.
We're all giving each other the look up here. Okay, Carolyn.
Well, this movement, I think, I'm sure is a movement of the Lord to have churches to write for their own churches. And usually when there's a movement like that, there's some teaching that comes forth to pastors and ministers. Now, I am in a Baptist church. Now, do you all know of any teaching that's going on, like in the nation for worship pastors and for pastors? My pastor is very supportive. Our former worship pastor wanted to play the songs that are more popular, the ones you hear on the radio, because everybody's familiar with them. We're looking for a new worship pastor if anybody wants to apply, wants to move to Lancaster, South Carolina. I would love for it to be a pastor that would write, but like I said, my pastor is very supportive, but there's got to be a music minister that's supportive. So do you know of any movement like that where pastors are being taught, ministers of music are being taught?
Chrissy, we need you. The song barn. We need the song barn.
I mean, that's part of the heart, I think, of what we want to do, right? And we've had this conversation.
You all are pointing out holes that need to be filled. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but... Now, I will say, Bethel has a great curriculum going on right now out in Reading. They just launched Creator, I think. That is like Tasha Cobb and Brandon Lake, and pretty much every big worship leader you know is talking about worship and theology. There are plenty of resources online, so please don't hear that I'm saying they're not there. But I just think we need more of them, specific for worship pastors. I think that'd be great.
I think we have the leader's guide for the book. That's something we've recommended to people to start with, worship pastors to take their teams through. And then what we did at Crosspoint, we basically came in, and it wasn't specific to the worship pastor, but we helped establish just that foundation through teaching the course live. And we did the same thing when we went to Ireland. A lot of these girls and guys in here were a part of coming in and helping teach. Yeah, Haley? Oh. No. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, but I think that's a huge need. I do, and we see that, and whatever we can do to help, we will. But these are trusted guys. I just want to say that right here. These are trusted men that are doing great things in this town and for the kingdom, and I think they might be a part of what's ahead. Where are you?
I'm sorry about that. I did not intend for you to stop talking. I was just thinking about the challenge of maintaining the heart of worship, and this is true outside of songwriting, it's true just in worship ministry or whatever in general, but I would love to just hear how you pastor people through, especially when you can tell that a heart check is needed. When you have, I'm confident, very talented people, but talent is not enough. And talent is not the point of our calling. And so I would just love to hear how y'all have maybe led through that and loved people, maybe back to the heart of worship.
Wow. That is awesome. So it's funny, I might call somebody out in the room, but there, especially being here in Nashville, you've got a lot of really talented people, like you said, right? But talent only takes you so far, right? And the goal is that your character out supersedes your talent. And one of the things that I've learned, which is hard at a big church, if I'm honest, which is why you have to raise up other leaders, is there has to be relationship, right? Like you actually have to know somebody well enough to know when a heart check is needed, right? Also, you have to know somebody well enough to know when it's time to call them up. So, I'll just say, this guy over here, Setnick, wave Setnick. Setnick is one of the most incredible vocalists you will ever hear, first of all. But I remember he came to Nashville, how many years ago? 3. And the first time he shows up and he's like, hey, I'm here, but I want to be a background singer. I just want to be background. I'm not a leader. And we were like, okay, that's cool. We need BGVs, we need people to kind of sit in that spot. And so he sat in the BGV spot for a while. And then, there was the prodding, the gentle prodding of like, bro, you're not supposed to just be a background singer. He's like, no, that's what I'm here for. That's what I want to do. And over the course of the last 3 years, just to speak to you in front of all these people, Setnick has risen up to be an incredible leader. And he leads our church in incredible ways. He's on the last recording and carried one of the songs. And sometimes it literally takes you seeing the potential and calling it out. What Cece did for Dwan. It's like so many times we don't want to push. We want to let people go at their own pace. And there are moments where no, step up. Yeah. Like it's time for you to step up and you instill confidence where there might not be confidence. And you say, I see it in you, so go.
Bro, you just said it. The trick, or not the trick, the heart is not calling someone out, but calling them up. Right? So I had a hard conversation literally 2 days ago over Cracker Barrel. Always choose Cracker Barrel as a good common denominator. And I had to ask someone to step off our team for the season. And that was the heart check, Haley, that you're talking about, where I said, hey, I need you to help me protect your reputation, right? I want to protect your reputation. I also need you to help me protect the purity of our worship culture. So inviting them into the process, hey, I'm with you. I'm not, saying get out of our courts, away from us, but how can we pastor you through this? And using that language, I want to call you up into this. And they had a meeting with one of our pastors today. And so if they're running toward community and toward healing, to identify, yeah, you're right, I had a blind spot, and you call them up out of that, it's tricky. But I love the heart of your question. I don't think anyone does it perfectly, but right. Yeah. And
it's way easier to do that than to do the opposite, where somebody feels like they're ready and they're not, and having that conversation, that hard check. But Yeah.
This is kind of one of those left field questions, but I do ministry cross culturally, and obviously our goal is to have people meet Jesus. And so I'm wondering, I have a big passion for languages, and there are tons of them in our community. I'm wondering if you guys are aware of any movements of songwriting in other languages or in combination with English, because I have a feeling a lot of what we're talking about is English.
Yes, I've been a part of 2 camps this year that were focused on Spanish-speaking churches. They were beautiful, and I can honestly say that I learned the most from people who don't speak English, because I think we talked about this in the class I did today, but there's a weird expectation on English-speaking churches for non-English speaking churches to sing their songs, instead of there being this invitation to sit in the room and write songs that we all can sing. And I actually have written one with Chrissy called Familia that Bethel Church did in Nashville 2 weeks ago called Familia. And we call it a Spanglish song because half of the chorus is English and half the chorus is Spanish, written with a fully Spanish-speaking person. So instead of asking Spanish-speaking people to understand English and vice versa, everybody's learning. Everybody's learning a language they don't know. And this is happening across the board. Large record companies are hosting these big camps to write these songs. Some of that is marketability. There's a lot of money in Spanish-speaking cultures. But if they want to do it for that reason, let them do that. But I think the church should be at the forefront of saying, the only way to get to Revelation, all nations, all tongues, is for us to be in the same room. And for us to not only be singing the same songs, but writing them together. Unfortunately, even though Nashville is a very diverse town, Spanish is obviously a growing language in our country. And there's a reason for that. But downtown Nashville, you have Kurdish-speaking people, you have immigrants from everywhere. I think one thing that'll be helpful for churches is, again, you probably have people in your church who are longing for their language to be represented. So start there. Ask them to come to the writing room, even if they've never written a song before. Oh, terrible story. It just hit me. Terrible. I'm gonna tell it even though it's embarrassing. I was riding with a friend of mine from Miami, Spanish-speaking pastor's daughter, and her interpretation of party was, anybody speak Spanish? I want to butcher it. It was supposed to be fiesta, but in Portuguese, a party is a different kind of party. I'll put it that way. Terrible kind of party. So we wrote this song with this girl from Miami, and in their language and in their culture, it was totally fine. So I get up like, church, we're gonna sing this song today in Spanish. We went in. And this is what I mean about your local church. This is why you have to include your church, because nobody in our church was in that right. The sweet 50-year-old lady came up to me and said, Pastor, I'm so sorry, but please don't ever sing that song again. She said, don't put it on the internet. CC Winans will be like blasted on New York Times. This was a terrible word. Terrible. Terrible. And so I was like, I didn't know. I called the other girl, and she's in Miami. She said, that's fine for our church. We say that word all the time. And so that's my point. When you step into that world, you gotta know your church. You gotta know your church, and you gotta know even down to their dialect what they wanna sing. Which even between Bethel and any other church, there's some things that we don't sing in our church from Bethel because it doesn't match our church.
Yeah, which speaks to a little bit I think why there hasn't been like the Nashville church thing, because you'll get in a room and sometimes it'll be like, oh well, we don't say that. We wouldn't, our church would never sing that. And so trying to, find which why like sometimes in a writing room it's good to know who you're writing for, because then you can really cater to that. when you're trying to write for the city, that's a tall order. It's the tension, which it can be done for sure. The trick is, how do we do that and it not be, watered down and it not say what it needs to say.
The only time that I've seen it work really well without any argument in just English is we had a theologian sit in the room with us. We had a writing camp at Integrity, actually. It was actually John Bevere's son, Addison, who is amazing, by the way. And he sat in the room with our writing team and was critiquing us through the roof. It's like, that's not a scripture. That's not a scripture. That's not a scripture. And you would be surprised how many things we get away with as songwriters that may not work if you really tested it among the church. But honestly, that's the test. If the universal global church is able to sing it, you're probably onto something scriptural, probably. And so back to his point of including your pastor, I think we need to have more teachers in the room. And honestly, I think the subject matter, a lot of our songs are now being written to talk about us. We talked about this morning, and talk about my experience rather than the holiness of God. Nobody's going to argue with holy, holy, holy. So if there's a church song of Nashville, it's probably going to be less lyrics and less maybe creative license and more psalming. More like, let's just sing the 23rd Psalm. I think that's going to be a more unifying way to write. And it may not scratch all of your creative buttons, but honestly, when you walk into a room of different cultures, the first thing you have to do is negotiate and say, my way of doing it is probably not everybody's way. And you got to find a center stone. I think the scripture is a center stone. It's no matter what language you speak, what denomination you're from, what corner of Nashville you're in, we can all agree on Jesus is holy, holy, holy. And I think that'll be a great song.
Okay, we got one last question here. Share.
Thank you guys for taking your time. I really that struck a chord with me what you said earlier, Taylor, about the vetting process. So like of the worship team, the worship ministry of your church, but in tandem with the the recording people. So my question is, how do you be selective without being exclusive, or do you have to be?
Yeah, I think we do, at every chance we get, we dispel the exclusivity, right, of our bridge worship crew, right? From the get-go, we pulled back the curtain. We're like, we're not trying to build a brand. We're not trying to be a record label. We want to write songs. We believe that songs are missionaries, right? They can travel further faster than we can. And so we actually are like, hey, if you're part of the worship team, your first primary focus is serving the people of the Bridge Church, right? If you're part of a bridge worship, you're really a missionary because you're sending songs out from the bridge, right? And so we have what we call team commitments, okay? And actually, if anyone wants this, I can totally send this to you. But it was so helpful for us to basically just write some things down. And a few of them are, we're a ministry, we're not a record label. We aren't here to make ourselves famous, we're here to help people see Jesus, right? Not only just for them to sing the gospel, but to see the gospel. No one knows what they're doing. We're all gonna make mistakes. Let's over-encourage and hyper-grace one another. And then 3, when we're choosing who's gonna lead, produce, design, etc., it's not who is better, it's who is a better fit for this project, right? We say, hey, we're all gonna eat, right? But all of us can't be a chef in the kitchen. But you have a seat at the table, so you're gonna eat the food that's prepared and cooked, right? You may not be a chef on this project, but you will get to eat the feast, right? And so for us, adding language of clarity to the distinction, right? Not verses, but those that are volunteers on our worship team at the Bridge, those that have a seat at the table for bridge worship, the songs out of the bridge, right, into the nations. It's been very, very helpful for us to be very clear. And people do get their feelings hurt. But one thing we have to realize too is Jesus handpicked his disciples. He had 12, right? And then there were like the 3 that he went even deeper with. And so whenever we pray, this is such a convicting thing. I'm saying it to myself. When we pray, Lord, I want to see you move. I think 90% of the time we're saying, Lord, I want to see you move through me. And so really, the pride will be almost self-revealed in conversations with people. So I actually don't shy away from those conversations. If someone says, hey, how do I become part of Bridge Worship, right? We go through a lot of things together, and we do a heart check, like you were saying, Haley. And we do not do it perfectly. And I think a lot of people in here would agree that that's a tension to manage, not to avoid. Press into it, right? Does that help? I feel like I danced around it, but great. Yeah, hey, I would love to send anything y'all need. I know these guys would be willing to do the same, but just some language that we've articulated that has helped us care for people in the process. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Okay, are we done? We go?
Hey, I just want to say we're so thankful for what you guys have poured into other people. I just want to recognize you as true shepherds. You really, really are, each of you. And I've seen you do it. I've seen you in practice. That is not always the case when you have a worship leader. These are shepherds. Their hearts are pure. Their motives are right. So they'll be here for a little longer, I think, as we're sort of gathering up for dinner. Come say hi, grab a hug, and we love you guys. We're so thankful for you and what you do for people, but for the kingdom. So we bless you guys. Thank you so much.